It's kinda dark out. I do think this fight of the light, fight of the light. This is a rough draft, but fuck it, the timing was right.
Well, we don't even start by saying the King of Belgium created a slave colony for 30 years. The government of Belgium ran the slave colony for another 40 years. The CIA assassinated your first popular leader, Mr. Lumumba, and then installed another dictatorship for the next 30 years. And then Glencore and others now suck out your cobalt without giving you tax income. We don't reflect on that. We say, what's wrong with you? Why don't you govern properly?
So in today's video, we're going to be looking at a compilation of 3 videos. The first one we just saw now that played at the beginning of this video. In these videos, we're going to be seeing them exposing themselves and the dubious activities that they have been spearheading.
You briefed the press, did you not, when you were there?
Well, I had several jobs. One of my jobs was that of analyst. I also was an interrogator and indeed briefed the press when we, the CIA, wanted to circulate disinformation on a particular issue. Disinformation is not necessarily a lie. It may be a half-truth. And we would pick out a journalist. I would go do the briefing and hope that he would put the information in print. For instance, if we wanted to get across to the American public that the North Vietnamese were building up their force structure in South Vietnam, I would go to a journalist and advise him that in the past 6 months, X number of North Vietnamese forces had come down the Ho Chi Minh Trail system through southern Laos. Now, there is no way a journalist can check that information. So either he goes with the information or he doesn't, and ordinarily or usually the journalist would go with it because it looked like some kind of exclusive. And I would say our percentage planning that kind of data was 70 to 80%. The correspondents we targeted were those who had terrific influence, the most respected journalists in Saigon, like Robert Chaplin of the New Yorker magazine, Kai's Beach of the Los Angeles Times from time to time, and also he worked for the Chicago Daily News. Bud Merrick of U.S. News and World Report, Malcolm Brown of the New York Times, even Maynard Parker of Newsweek magazine. We would go after these gentlemen. I would be directed to cultivate them, to spend time with them at the Caravel Hotel or the Continental Hotel, to socialize with them, and slowly but surely to try to gain their confidence by dolloping out valid information which was true. And then I would drop into a conversation the data that we wanted to get across, which might not be true. One piece of data, for instance, that we managed to plan in the New Yorker magazine had to do with a supposed North Vietnamese effort in 1973 to develop airfields along the border of South Vietnam. The reason we wanted to plant this information was that we were trying to persuade the U.S. Congress that Saigon should continue to get a great deal of aid, and that the North Vietnamese were the chief violators of the ceasefire accord. That was printed in the New Yorker magazine under the byline of Robert Chaplin, as indeed was a great deal of such information which we tried to circulate. If I planted a piece of information with a reporter, I would ordinarily then try to create an environment in which he could not check the information. I would go to the British ambassador and brief him on the disinformation I had just given the reporter. So when the reporter wanted to cross-check what I'd told him with, say, the British ambassador, New Zealand ambassador, or what have you, he would get false confirmation, the same message coming back at him, and he'd say, aha, I've got proof that Frank Snepp told me the truth, when in fact what he'd gotten was simply an echo of what I'd given him in the first place via the British ambassador or other of our friendly diplomatic contacts. I am, as an ex-CIA agent, opposed to the disinformation activities in which I was involved. I admit that I was involved, and I think it served no useful purpose propagandizing the American public, or Congress is not the CIA's job.
So that was former CIA officer Frank Snipp blowing the whistle on the CIA, and he did this in 1983. I absolutely love it when some of these folks come out and do their exposés. Like, the thing they sweet me for Bel-Air, because it's not like we don't know that these things are going on. It's not like we don't know that they are doing these things, but it's hard to have evidence for it because they are usually very careful how they walk and how they go about hiding their dubious activities, because these folks are very careful in hiding their tracks and walking underground. It's like you are fighting an invisible enemy. You come out all the time and say, oh, I know these folks are doing something to me, but you do not have any proof to show that they are truly doing anything to you. Then it begins to look like you are making up things in your head. So when we have people like this come out and expose them, then we're like, oh, now we have evidence.
Well, one of the greatest violations of human rights is the inability to live in peace. And if you go around the world and ask people which is the most warlike country on earth, which one do you think they would respond? The United States. Since we left the Second World War, and even before, but since we left the Second World War, the United States has been almost constantly at war in some part of the world.
This may not be a good thing to say to a group of Americans, but I think that the historical trend is for the United States to relinquish its unquestioned domination of the world's politics and economy and cultural influence.
In the last number of years, since 1949, when we normalized relations, the United States has been at constant war with Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria and Yemen and many other countries. Almost constant war. And the expert economists estimate that we've spent about $3 trillion on those wars. China has not been in combat with anybody since 1949. And they have that, you might say, that same $3 trillion. They have a very flourishing economy to spend on things good for the Chinese people. I'll just give you 2 or 3 examples right quick. One is that they have 18,000 miles of high-speed railroad. How many miles do we have? How many are we likely to have 20 years from now? Who knows? See, a child born in Beijing now, with all of its smog, has a life expectancy of 5 years more than a child born in Washington, D.C. China expects to announce in the near future that there's no more severe poverty in China. They have spread the wealth of China from the East Coast all the way to the Urals.
Guys, I just want to bring this compilation to you. If only following this video is going to be their change in behavior, that would actually be nice, right? But yeah, this is all we have right now, just them exposing themselves and talking about the terrible things that they do all around the world. But of course, let me know down below in the comment section what you think, and I'll see you guys in the next one.